Welcome to Real and Deep Love Stories, where every heartbeat hides a story too raw to forget. Here, love isn't perfect, it's silent glances that say everything, touches that mean more than words, moments stolen from time itself. You'll feel the warmth of forbidden tenderness, the ache of watching love slip away, and the haunting silence that follows what never truly ended. Every story here is told from the heart, deep, real, and painfully human. So if you've ever loved someone you couldn't keep, or felt a goodbye that still lingers, you're in the right place. Stay with me, and let's feel what love really means in its beauty, in its breaking, and in what remains after. It started quietly, almost invisibly, like the way dawn seeps into a dark room. There were no grand declarations, no promises carved into words, just the slow unfolding of something neither of us dared to name. It was in the silence between us that everything lived. A glance held 1,000 unsaid things. A brush of his hand against mine felt like an entire confession. The air itself seemed to hum when he was near, as if even the world understood what we were afraid to speak aloud. There was a night I can't forget, soft rain outside, the kind that never really stops, just lingers in the air. He sat close, his sleeve brushing against mine, and for a long while neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. His eyes met mine and stayed there. There was something raw in that gaze, a kind of honesty that words could have ruined. Every heartbeat felt louder than the rain, like the world had gone quiet just to let us exist in that moment. I remember how time seemed to pause, how even breathing felt sacred. It was never about possession or definition. What we had existed in fragments, moments that stitched themselves together into something too real to explain. He'd smile sometimes, that half smile that carried both warmth and apology. I never asked what he meant by it, maybe because deep down I already knew. We were both pretending that we didn't feel what we did, trying to stay within the lines the world had drawn for us. Yet each time he looked at me, those lines blurred until they disappeared. There were evenings that ended in silence, but not the kind that pushes people apart. This silence was filled with everything we couldn't say. Sitting side by side, we'd share nothing but quiet, and somehow that quiet became everything. I could feel the weight of his thoughts, his hesitation, his longing, all pressing softly against the space between us. It was a strange kind of closeness, the kind that both heals and hurts at once. Sometimes his fingers would graze mine accidentally, maybe or maybe not. That small touch would leave a trail of warmth long after he'd pulled away. It was the language we invented for ourselves, one made of gestures, of pauses, of shared breathing. A love that lived inside the unsaid. Words felt too clumsy, too small for something so vast. Every time I thought about speaking, about saying something, the fear of breaking that fragile magic kept me still. There were days when everything around us continued as usual, people laughing, doors closing, life moving on, and yet beneath it all, there was this undercurrent. A secret rhythm that only we could hear. It was in the way he'd find me in a crowded room without looking, in the way our eyes met for a heartbeat longer than they should. No one else noticed, but to me, those stolen seconds were entire lifetimes. Once, when the evening light fell across his face, he looked so lost that it ached to see him. I wanted to reach out, to tell him that whatever it was he couldn't say, I already understood. But love like ours didn't need to be spoken. It existed in that fragile space between restraint and surrender, held together by everything we chose not to do, everything we couldn't allow ourselves to become. The nights were the hardest. When the world went quiet and there was nothing left to distract the mind, that's when memories returned the strongest. The sound of his voice, the way he said my name like it was a secret, the look in his eyes when he thought I wasn't watching, all of it stayed. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and feel the echo of him beside me, not in body, but in something deeper. That ache, that longing, was both comfort and curse. I often wonder if he felt it too, that silent pull that refused to fade. There are moments that still replay like unfinished sentences, and I think maybe that's what we were, an unfinished story. A beginning that never found its ending, a love that lived not in what happened, but in everything that could have. Years pass, but the memory doesn't age. It stays young, untouched by time, living quietly in the background of all things. Some connections never ask for permanence, they exist to remind us that even in silence, love can be infinite. It doesn't always need a name, or a future, or a promise. Sometimes it just is. And though life carried us forward, and the distance between us became measured in more than just miles, I still feel it sometimes, that same quiet electricity in the air when his memory drifts close. The world moves on, but certain bonds never dissolve. They simply find new ways to exist, softer, quieter, but still there. Maybe that's what true connection really is, something that exists beyond the reach of words, beyond the shape of time. Something that doesn't ask to be seen, only felt. And even now, when everything else has changed, that unspoken bond still breathes somewhere between the heartbeats. It was never said aloud, yet it was the truest thing I've ever known. It began in a moment that should have meant nothing, a glance held too long, a silence that stretched just a little too far. What existed between us was never meant to exist at all. It lived in shadows, in the spaces between what was allowed and what was real. Every time his hand brushed against mine, it felt like touching fire, dangerous, consuming, impossible to let go of. There was no name for what it was, only the quiet understanding that we were standing at the edge of something we could never claim. There was guilt in every heartbeat, yet neither of us could pull away. When his eyes met mine, the world seemed to stop pretending. The air thickened, the noise around us faded, and all that remained was the ache of wanting something forbidden. It wasn't about desire alone, it was something deeper, something that tied the soul in knots. Every stolen glance was a confession, every breath shared between us, a betrayal of everything we were supposed to protect. There were nights that carried the weight of that secret, nights when the darkness became our only witness. His hand would find mine, trembling, hesitant, but desperate. There was always a pause before the touch, a moment where we both silently asked if it was worth it. If the ache of loving in secret was more bearable than the emptiness of staying apart. The answer always came in the same way, in the closeness that followed, in the breath that caught between us, in the quiet surrender of restraint. The warmth of him felt like home and exile at once. Every kiss carried two truths: the depth of our love and the pain of knowing it couldn't last. His lips spoke what neither of us could say out loud. Each time he whispered my name, it sounded like both a promise and an apology. The world outside disappeared, and for those fleeting moments, it didn't matter that our love was built on borrowed time. But even in the tenderness, there was cruelty, the kind that hides in beauty, in moments too perfect to survive. I could see it in his eyes sometimes, that flicker of fear, of longing wrapped in guilt. We both knew we were breaking something sacred, even as we held each other tighter. Love wasn't supposed to feel like this, it wasn't supposed to hurt and heal at the same time. Yet it did. It was a strange kind of paradise, one that demanded pain as its price. He would pull me close and then pull away, as if fighting with his own heart. I could feel the battle inside him, the way his love tried to resist itself. There were times he'd look at me and say nothing, but the silence between us would tremble with everything he wanted to say I shouldn't. But I can't stop, and neither could I. The forbidden had already taken root in us. It had already written its name inside our chests. There was a night when everything changed. The moonlight poured through the window, soft and fragile. He reached for me like someone reaching for something they knew they'd lose. Our hands met, and in that touch, there was everything: longing, sorrow, truth. His heart beat so loud I could feel it through his skin. The way he looked at me made time stop. He didn't say it, but I knew he loved me, and yet I also knew he couldn't stay. The days that followed were filled with silence that felt heavier than words. We still saw each other, still shared those stolen moments, but something inside us had shifted. The tenderness remained, but it now carried the sharpness of guilt. The sweetness of his touch began to taste like farewell. Every time he smiled, I could see the distance forming in his eyes, as if he was already learning how to let go. I tried to convince myself that what we had was enough, those brief hours, those whispered promises that never reached the daylight. But love like ours doesn't stay still. It grows even when it shouldn't, and with every passing day, it became harder to pretend that it wasn't real. The world saw sin where we saw love, and maybe they were both right. Sometimes he'd hold me so tightly it felt like he was trying to memorize me, the curve of my back, the scent of my hair, the rhythm of my breath. And I let him, knowing that soon memories would be all we had left. When he finally pulled away for the last time, he didn't say goodbye. He just looked at me with that same quiet pain in his eyes, and somehow that silence said everything. Even now, I can still feel the warmth of those stolen moments, the way his hand fit around mine, the way our hearts found each other in secret. It was love that wasn't meant to exist, but it did, fiercely and beautifully. And though it ended as all forbidden things do quietly, painfully, I would live it again if it meant feeling that impossible tenderness once more. It was supposed to be just another evening, nothing special, just another night where pretending felt easier than truth. The air was soft with laughter, light with music, but underneath it all, something restless moved inside. There was a kind of stillness in him that I had learned to recognize, the calm that comes before something breaks. He stood across the room, smiling that familiar half-smile, the one that once belonged only to me, but tonight it wasn't mine. When he took her hand, I knew. The way his fingers wrapped around hers, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, it was the beginning of an ending I had always feared, but never truly believed would come. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and ache. The room blurred, not from the lights, but from the storm building behind my eyes. He moved to the center, and the crowd began to hush. I could feel the world narrowing, everything slowing to that unbearable, sharp moment of realization. When he went down on one knee, time collapsed. My heart stopped trying to beat in rhythm with his. There it was, the sight I had once dreamed of, now turned against me. The ring in his hand shimmered under the golden lights, a cruel reflection of what was once promised in silence. Laughter broke out around me, clapping hands, cheers, the music swelling, but I couldn't hear any of it clearly. The sound came from far away, muffled by the rush of my own pulse. I stood frozen, my smile carefully stitched in place, while inside, something fragile was breaking in slow motion. Every heartbeat felt like glass shattering underfoot. He looked happy, genuinely, beautifully happy. That's what hurt the most, because I knew that smile. I had seen it in the dark when no one else could. I had felt it pressed against my skin, had carried it like a secret through countless nights. Now, it was no longer mine to hold. He gave it to her as if it had never belonged elsewhere. Memories came flooding in, cruel and relentless, the nights of whispered dreams, the quiet moments that had once felt infinite. The warmth of his touch, the sound of his voice when he said my name like a promise. All of it gone in a heartbeat, replaced by the image of him kneeling for someone else. I could almost hear his voice, the same tone, the same sincerity, only now it wasn't for me. I tried to look away, but my eyes betrayed me. They stayed on him, memorizing every detail like they were collecting pain to keep. I wanted to hate him for it, for choosing a life that didn't include me, but hate wouldn't come. Only love did, twisted and aching, refusing to die even as it tore me apart. Someone beside me whispered how perfect they looked together. I nodded, because what else was there to do? Pretend, just as I had always done. The applause grew louder, people moved closer to capture the moment, and I stood still, invisible, holding 1,000 unsaid words behind a trembling smile. He didn't look at me, not once. Maybe he couldn't. Or maybe he had already learned how to stop. When she said yes, the crowd erupted. Champagne glasses clinked, flashes went off, and the music swelled again. It felt like the world was celebrating the exact moment mine collapsed. I felt the sound inside me hollow, distant, like echoes in an empty room. And yet, even in that breaking, I couldn't stop loving him. That was the cruelest part. Love doesn't vanish just because it should. It lingers, clinging to what's already gone. I slipped away quietly, unnoticed. Outside, the night air was cold, fighting real. The stars blurred above me, and for the first time, I let the tears come. They didn't fall out of anger, just loss, a loss too deep for words, too old for denial. It wasn't just him I was losing. It was the version of myself that believed we would last. There's a strange kind of peace that follows destruction, the numbness after the storm, when the heart stops fighting and just feels. That's what it was like walking away. Every step carried a memory, every breath a goodbye. The sound of his laughter still echoed behind me, soft and haunting, fading into the distance until it was just a ghost. People always talk about heartbreak like it's a single moment, but it isn't. It's every second afterward, every morning, when his name almost slips out. Every night when silence fills the space he once did. It's learning how to live in a world where his love is no longer a part of yours. Sometimes I still see him, not in reality, but in the spaces between dreams. Still smiling, still reaching, still out of reach. And even now, when I think I've healed, the memory returns the image of him kneeling under golden lights, holding someone else's future in his hands. That moment still lives in me, not as pain anymore, but as proof that I once loved so deeply. It broke me open. And maybe that's what love truly is, not what survives, but what changes you forever, even after it's gone. Nights have grown longer since he left. They stretch endlessly, heavy with silence that feels almost alive, a silence that breathes his name when the world has gone to sleep. Every shadow carries the shape of what once was. Every whisper of wind sounds like his voice. It's strange how absence can fill a room so completely, how a heart can still reach for something it knows it will never touch again. There are moments when sleep almost comes, but it never stays. The mind drifts to places it shouldn't, replaying old scenes like war, not film. The way he used to look at me, steady, quiet, as if memorizing, the warmth of his breath against my skin, the way his laughter used to rise softly in the dark, somewhere between joy and surrender. I tell myself to stop remembering, but memory has its own pulse. It doesn't obey reason. It moves with the rhythm of what's been lost. Sometimes, when the night feels too still, I can almost feel him near. It isn't imagination, not really. It's more like the echo of something that never truly left. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. The weight of his touch still lingers, the scent of him hidden somewhere between dreams. It's cruel how love stays even when the person doesn't. Days pass, but they feel empty. People talk, the world keeps spinning, but inside, time stands still. There's a kind of haunting that doesn't involve ghosts, only memories that refuse to die. The smallest things become reminders, a song that plays out of nowhere, a scent caught in the air, a phrase someone says that sounds just like him. It takes nothing to bring it all rushing back. I've tried to erase it, to fill the silence with noise, but nothing fits. There's always a space that belongs only to him, one I can't seem to close. Love like that doesn't fade, it lingers, soft and relentless. It doesn't ask to be remembered, it just is. Some nights I wonder if he feels it too, if somewhere his chest tightens without knowing why, if his hands still remember the shape of mine. Maybe he does, or maybe he's learned to forget, as people do when they choose peace over pain. The hardest part isn't missing him. It's the knowing that he's out there, alive, moving through a world that no longer includes me. That somewhere he laughs and someone else gets to see the light in his eyes. That thought alone carries a weight too heavy to name, but I carry it anyway. There are moments when I catch myself smiling at nothing, the kind of smile that hides 1,000 memories. I remember the way he used to tilt his head when he was listening, how his voice could calm a storm inside me. It's strange how love can turn into something that both comforts and hurts at once, how it can be the only thing keeping you alive, and the very thing that keeps reopening the wound. Sometimes I still whisper his name into the dark, not to call him back, but just to remember the sound of it in my mouth. It feels like both a prayer and a farewell. There are no tears anymore, just a quiet ache that sits somewhere deep, too settled to leave, too familiar to hate. Pain has its own kind of intimacy. It becomes part of who you are, part of what keeps you human. People say time heals everything. They don't understand that some loves aren't meant to heal. They live inside you, not as scars, but as something eternal, not pain, not joy, just presence. I've stopped trying to move on. Moving on feels like erasing something sacred, and I can't do that. I don't want to forget. Forgetting would mean it never mattered, and it did, more than anything ever has. Every now and then, I walk past the places where we once were. The park bench where laughter came too easily, the street corner where our hands first brushed, the quiet cafe where he told me things he'd never said out loud before. They're all still there, unchanged, holding echoes of us. I sit for a while, listen to the hum of life going on around me, and I realize I'm still waiting, though I know he's not coming back, not really. But love has never been about reason. It's about faith in what can no longer be seen. There's a kind of beauty in the ache, in knowing that something so deep could exist at all. It doesn't fade, it doesn't end, it just becomes quieter, softer, like the echo of a song long after it's finished playing. The melody lingers even when the world has moved on. And so the nights remain long, the silence familiar, the memories uninvited but welcome all the same. Because somewhere between the longing and the letting go, I've learned something simple, that love doesn't always end with goodbye. Sometimes it stays. It just changes shape, turning into something that lives quietly within, forever. If this story touched your heart, don't leave in silence. Hit like, share it with someone who still believes in love, and subscribe for more deep, real moments that speak where words fall short. Until next time, keep feeling, keep remembering, and never stop believing in love that lives beyond endings.